My fiancé personally put me on the regent's bed. He said, humiliating the woman of his mortal enemy will make the prince happy. I said calmly, that makes sense. After spending a night with the regent, I met my fiancé. He knelt before me and flattered me in every possible way. You are so favored now, why don't you say a few good words to the king for me? Before I could answer, the man in the golden crown and dragon robe behind me burst into laughter. That makes sense. But killing the unfaithful man will make my wife happy. 01. On the eve of the wedding, the fiancé's inappropriate words and deeds angered the regent, who had great power in the government. I heard that the regent is cruel and ruthless and will take revenge for any slight. The whole family was in a state of panic because of this, like a frightened bird. At this time, Wei Zhaoxing thought of me. He said, Cui Yi, please ask the regent king for mercy on my behalf. You are very pretty, and giving you to him will show my sincerity in my apology. I tensed up, gritted my teeth, raised my hand, and slapped Wei Zhaoxing in the face. You and I were betrothed to each other since birth. Although the ceremony has not yet been completed, I have already regarded you as my husband in my heart. How could you send me to the palace to be humiliated? Wei Zhaoxing said, since we are husband and wife, we should share weal and woe. Why not ask the prince for mercy on my behalf? Looking at his earnest expression, I just felt it was ridiculous. Just do it and don't talk nonsense. Even if you are a commoner, I will not leave you. Wei Zhaoxing suddenly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. Shun Sui, please stop talking nonsense. I studied hard for 10 years and finally got a government position. How can I just throw it away? I have made up my mind about today's matter. Go and wash up quickly. I will take you to the palace in an hour. The oaths are as heavy as mountains and seas, but they are not as heavy as a black veil. I straightened my back and sneered. Wei Zhaoxing, is this also what your parents wanted? You, the Wei family, pride yourself on your good reputation. How could you do such a shameful thing as selling your wife for fame? Wei Zhaoxing's expression changed several times, and finally, he stiffened his neck and said, My father said that your family fell into poverty 10 years ago. If he hadn't taken you in, you would have been ruined long ago, and you wouldn't have the luxurious living you have today. We in the Wei family have been very kind to you. You must repay the kindness. It turned out that the whole family had discussed it and agreed on it. I would trade my innocence for the glory of my family. Now that things have come to this, I can only laugh at myself. It is inevitable in this world that love is misplaced. I swallowed back my tears. My throat feels bitter. Wei Zhaoxing walked away in a huff. The door closed and Coco immediately knelt in front of me. Miss, I've found a buyer for what you asked me to do a few days ago. Do we still want to sell this shop? I took the 2 property deeds from Coco. In recent years, I have secretly opened 2 perfume and powder shops, which have made a lot of money, which can be equivalent to 6,000 taels of silver. I originally wanted to give this money to Wei Zhaoxing so that he could smooth over his connections and solve his current predicament. But I didn't expect that he came up with the idea before me. It was clearly Wei Zhaoxing who offended the regent. Why is it me, Shun Sui, who is humiliated? I stared at my pale face in the mirror. Not for sale. You come and do my makeup. Wei Zhaoxing wanted to make the regent prince feel better. How could I possibly grant his wish? 02. Wei Zhaoxing took me to stand in the palace for 3 hours. When my legs were stiff, I finally received the summons from the prince. Wei Zhaoxing's cheeks were red with excitement, and he whispered to me, Cui Yi, please be gentler and more careful, and make your waist more flexible. The lives of my entire Wei family depend on you. I nod my head in agreement. Isn't it that I am dressed up in gorgeous clothes today just to kill all the people in the Wei family? I lowered my head, looked submissive, and followed Wei Zhaoxing without saying a word. I watched him hunch over and apologize to the regent. The tone was the most flattering I had ever heard. I spoke too quickly and angered the prince. I brought my fiancé with me today. At this point, Wei Zhaoxing finally showed a hint of embarrassment on his face. But he still added with a charming smile, Let her serve the prince. As he said this, he pushed me forward. On the high couch, the man leaned against the pillow with one leg bent, looking lazy. From this angle, I could only see the left half of his face. This person was about 28 or 29 years old, wearing purple clothes, a jade crown, sword-like eyebrows, and star-like eyes. Who would have thought that Fu Jie, the powerful regent, actually had such a handsome appearance? Fu Jie was playing with the wine glass in his hand without even looking at us. After a while, he slowly spoke, his tone joking. "Let your fiancé serve me?" Lord Wei is really unreserved. But there are tens of thousands of beautiful women in the world. Why should I give you this favor? Wei Zhaoxing licked his lips and said forcefully, "Cui Yi is not only beautiful, but also has other wonders that others don't know about. When she was in love, she had a subtle fragrance, which was so alluring that the prince knew it as soon as he smelled it. He was praising me. Used the most obscene words. With every word I said, my cheeks got hotter. The fingertips that were pinching the hem of her skirt had gradually turned white. Just when I couldn't bear it any longer, the man on the high seat suddenly sneered. He said, "Lord Wei is so boastful. If I don't find out the truth, wouldn't it be disrespectful to the beauty?" Fu Jie turned over and got off the bed, then walked towards me. A corner of a dark purple robe flashed before my eyes. A folding fan was placed against my chin, exerting a little force to help me lift my head. The fan bone looked like jade but not jade, like bamboo but not bamboo, and was so cool that I couldn't help but shiver slightly. Fu Jie looked me up and down. That playful look suddenly froze when he saw the tears in the corners of my eyes. And the moment our eyes met, I felt a chill down my spine. Because Fu Jie was wearing half of a black iron mask on the right side of his face. He is obviously a very handsome man, worthy of the words Jilan Jade Tree. But that half mask looked hideous and frightening, like an Azura devil snatching lives from hell. 03. Fu Jie stared at me with a burning gaze, and it was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. After a while, he smiled. "I understand Lord Wei's intentions. It's just that Lord Wei's wife seems unwilling to serve me." Fu Jie bent down, grabbed my wrist, and lifted it gently. The gold and jade-inlaid dagger fell to the ground. Wei Zhaoxing's mouth froze. And my eyes also turned red. I hid the dagger close to my body and no one noticed it, but Fu Jie saw through it at a glance. I had originally planned to commit suicide in the palace, but I would rather die with honor than let Wei Zhaoxing be disgraced. But now that I have calmed down, I am no longer willing to give in. Why should I die? My father and brother risked their lives to save my life. I cannot seek death so easily. Even if I die, it won't be today. Even today, it's not for Wei Zhaoxing. I pursed my lips and said calmly, "Your Highness has misunderstood." I picked up the dagger with my left hand and twisted a strand of black hair with my right hand, looking at the shocked eyes of the two men. The knife fell with a sudden movement. Throwing the long black hair to Wei Zhaoxing, I whispered, "I am willing to serve you, my lord." Carrying a dagger is just cutting off one's hair to sever one's ties with one's loyalty. Fu Jie couldn't help but laugh, as if he was really pleased by me. He laughed enough and glanced at Wei Zhaoxing, whose face was complicated. "Her name is Sui. She is quite brave. When are you going to get married?" 3 days later. "Then I will gladly accept her." Just a few words made Wei Zhaoxing, who was standing next to him, smile. "May I ask, Your Majesty, when will I be able to resume my position?" Fu Jie tucked my scattered hair behind my ears and smiled faintly. 3 days later. "After Cui Yi has served me, you will take her back. Marry her in 3 days, and you will be able to resume your position." Wei Zhaoxing's expression suddenly changed. "Why do you say that, Your Majesty?" "I am willing to offer her to Your Majesty as a concubine." Fu Jie smiled and said, Not right, not right. Lord Wei and his wife were married in a formal ceremony. How can you let the marriage be annulled just because she served me?" Wei Zhaoxing's body trembled, and he almost couldn't stand steadily. Fu Jie's smile deepened. "This king hopes that all women in the world can marry a husband who will cherish her, live in harmony, and grow old together. Lord Wei, Please don't let me down. If I see a beautiful woman crying when I visit the Wei residence, I will be furious. This sounds unremarkable, but after careful consideration, there is a deeper meaning. Having just presented his wife to the emperor, Wei Zhaoxing was still able to remain calm and composed. At this moment, he was sweating profusely and looked pale. I lowered my head, a knowing smile already appearing at the corner of my lips. Wei Zhaoxing thought that by humiliating his fiancé, he could gain Fu Jie's favor. However, Fu Jie unexpectedly took advantage of the situation and asked Wei Zhaoxing to take the beauty he had adopted as his legal wife. He also brazenly stated that as long as he wanted, he could come and go from Wei's mansion at any time and have sex with his wife. This is simply trampling on Wei Zhaoxing's face. Fu Jie really hated Wei Zhaoxing. The rumors that the regent was cunning, cruel, and inhumane were not exaggerated. But how can I protect myself when I am caught in the middle? 04. Amidst his laughter, Fu Jie leaned over, picked me up, and took me to the inner room. Throw down a frivolous sentence. Master Wei, please stay here for a moment. The night is short. I will go first for you. As the night deepened, candles flickered in the inner room and the curtains were drawn heavily. Fu Jie held my hand and stood in front of the bed. Under the mask, the man's expression was gloomy. But I have made up my mind. I never thought that one day I would use my beauty to please others. But I can even risk my life, let alone my face. I bit my lower lip, closed my eyes, and slowly raised my fingers to untie the intricate double knot on the collar of my pink blouse. Yet, something pressed against my fingers. Cold and hard. It was the folding fan that Fu Jie always carried with him. Fu Jie lowered his eyes and looked at me steadily. The force of the fan was neither light nor heavy, hitting me again and again, as if trying to open my collar. It also seems like it wants to close it. My face flushed, unsure of Fu Jie's intentions. Prince? He looked away. Fu Jie had a handsome appearance, but at this moment, his handsomeness was mixed with a hint of evil. He called my name slowly and calmly. Cui, no rush. There is something more interesting that I want to teach you. The red candles are burning high, and the fragrance is flowing. Through the half-dropped gauze, I could only see the overlapping figures of Fu Jie and I. But if you look past the curtain, you can see Fu Jie leaning on the couch with a distant smile. He stared at me standing beside him. Every word is correct and well-spoken. Death is the simplest thing, but it can only make loved ones sad and enemies happy. Why don't you turn the Wei family upside down and let them suffer the consequences of their actions? I stared at Fu Jie's nonchalant eyes. The long fingers secretly clenched into the palm of the hand. The world teaches girls to be virtuous. Before marriage, they should obey their fathers. After marriage, they should obey their husbands. After their husbands die, they should obey their sons. But it never said, what should the woman do if the man is unbearable to obey? Growing up in the Wei family, Mother Wei always taught me to follow the rules and be gentle and reserved. I listened, but I didn't take it to heart. Otherwise, why would I carry a dagger with the determination to die together with Wei Zhaoxing? All the grievances, resentment, helplessness, and frustration after being betrayed turned into anger from that moment on. Seeing that I seemed to have realized something, a hint of sympathy suddenly appeared in Fu Jie's fierce eyes. He said, "Don't be afraid. Just do it. I will protect you. The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Fu Jie hated Wei Zhaoxing, and so did I. He can borrow my hand and let Wei Zhaoxing sweep the floor elegantly. I can also use his hand to make Wei Zhaoxing's life a living hell. Everyone gets what they need, and what's the harm? After a long time, a smile appeared on the corner of my mouth. "Thank you for your teachings, Your Majesty. The ceremony is engraved in my heart." 05. The next morning, when I came out of my inner room, my hair was disheveled and my eyes were hazy. A delicate look after receiving a favor. Wei Zhaoxing just glanced at me, then turned away and tugged at his collar in annoyance. But he didn't dare to get angry with me. because Fu Jie rewarded me with gold, silver, and jewelry worth 1,000 pieces of gold. It was obvious at a glance that he was very satisfied with my service. Wei Zhaoxing gritted his teeth and got into the carriage with me. Just as the servants whipped, a lazy voice suddenly sounded. Wait a minute. The curtain was lifted, revealing Fu Jie's tired face. His eyes swept across the anxious Wei Zhaoxing and fell on me. Then he smiled and said, I forgot that I have something to give to the beautiful lady. Fu Jie stretched out his hand and grabbed my sleeve. With a click, a cold, heavy object was buckled on my wrist. Sui's wrist is as white as snow, and this bracelet is perfect for her. As if it wasn't intimate enough, he leaned over and kissed the back of my hand before letting go. The gold bracelet is so exquisitely crafted that it must be worth a lot of money. But I didn't feel happy at all. When I walked along the palace corridor just now, I saw a series of bird cages hanging under the eaves. Each captive bird wore a pair of red gold shackles. Fu Jie is a cynical person. I think his playing tricks on me is no different from teasing a bird. But it doesn't matter. What I hate is Wei Zhaoxing, who pushed me into the fire pit. If I have to use Fu Jie's hand, I don't mind. My eyelashes trembled slightly, and I said shyly, Thank you for your gift, Your Majesty. Next time, I will serve you with even more dedication and effort. I felt the man next to me breathing heavily. So I turned around and smiled at Wei Zhaoxing. Go ahead. When you sent me to the palace, you said that we were husband and wife. Now that I have been rewarded by the prince, as your husband, why don't you thank me? Wei Zhaoxing clenched his fists, and his cheeks turned red. How could he have the nerve to thank her for such a favor? However, after weighing the pros and cons, he bowed respectfully. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift. Such servility made Fu Jie laugh heartily. The carriages and horses were in a rush, driving out of the palace. Wei Zhaoxing opened his mouth several times, but seemed to be hesitant to speak. I knew what he was going to ask. I also know that he doesn't dare to ask anything. I just leaned against the car wall with a smile on my face, letting the light from the golden bracelet flow and sting his eyes. 06. When the carriage arrived at Wei's house, it was already dawn. A servant had already passed the message. Wei Zhaoxing's parents came over in 2 or 3 steps, tears streaming down their faces. Xing'e, you didn't come home all night. You scared us. Is there anything you're planning? The earnest words stopped immediately when he saw me. Mother Wei coughed lightly and asked uncomfortably, Xing'e, why did you bring her back? Could it be that the prince didn't like her? Then why didn't you come back all night? Father Wei was obviously experienced. He looked at the boxes of property in the carriage, guessed something, and said hurriedly, Since the prince has rewarded you with property, I guess your official position will be safe. Under the gaze of his parents, Wei Zhaoxing's face first turned blue, and then white. He sat down on the ground and cried loudly. The prince agreed to reinstate me. Wei's parents were immediately delighted. We will go burn incense in front of our ancestors now. It is they who bless us to get through this disaster safely. Is it the blessing of the ancestors or the blessing of the beauty? The old couple are old and incompetent, and they have put the cart before the horse. I coughed lightly. Only then did Wei's parents turn their attention back to me. The contempt in their eyes was clear. When I came to live with the Wei family 10 years ago, although the Wei parents were reluctant, they treated me fairly well. I didn't expect that once the relationship was exposed, they would stop trying to cover it up. Mother Wei ordered the servants, Send Miss Shen to a farm in the country. She will be well fed and well cared for the rest of her life. Even so, the rope in the servant's hand was as thick as a child's arm. I looked calm and even stretched out my hands to let them tie me up. The gold bracelet on his wrist swayed, shining brightly, and suddenly caught Wei Zhaoxing's attention. He suddenly rushed in front of me, as if facing a powerful enemy, and stretched out his hand to stop me. Absolutely not. My child wants to marry Tsui. Wei's father was furious. She is already a spent flower. How can she be the new bride of our Wei family? Wei Zhaoxing burst into tears and stutteredly told the truth. The prince said that I can only be reinstated after I marry Tsui. We need a sedan chair with 8 bearers, a grand banquet for guests, and an announcement to the world. And he was in despair and lowered his head. The prince said that he would come to my wedding in person. As soon as he finished speaking, the servant let out a scream. It turned out that Wei's father had fainted and was unconscious. Wei's mother shouted, "Grandpa," and was at a loss. Wei Zhaoxing beat his chest and stamped his feet, but he did not dare to curse Fu Jie at all. I looked straight ahead, took light steps, and walked around the area where people and horses were stumbling. I ran into Coco, who was running towards me. She pulled my sleeve and looked me up and down. "Miss, you're back. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you want to take a shower and change clothes?" At this point, her eyes were already filled with tears. In the huge Wei mansion, only Coco cares about me. I put my head on Coco's shoulder like a wandering soul. Only then did the tears begin to fall, drop by drop, as if they could not be stopped. I was so frightened that night that I couldn't sleep, and I was already feeling groggy. But at the end of the road, I cannot collapse. Those who betray me will never be forgiven. 07. The wedding has been planned for many days, and everything has been arranged. But I suddenly got angry. One moment I complained that the jewel on my head was not bright enough, and the next moment I said that the menu at the banquet was shabby and not grand enough. The whole Wei family was in chaos because of me. Wei Zhaoxing pinched his nose and begged me to stop making trouble. "Shun Tsue, considering your current situation, I am already doing you a great favor by marrying you. Why can't you just be content?" Wei Zhaoxing still didn't know who was asking whom for help. I cracked some melon seeds, my eyes narrowed, and I laughed out loud. "Oh, if marrying me is so difficult for you, why not just not marry me? I will write a letter to the prince to explain that the wedding is cancelled." Wei Zhaoxing's expression changed drastically, and he immediately softened his posture, half knelt in front of me, and said softly, "Cui, why do you have to do this? We have been friends for more than 10 years, but you just stayed with the prince for one night, and now you're talking about him all the time." At this point, she seemed to feel extremely wronged. "The prince humiliated me like this, but you didn't feel any pain for me at all. You are really heartless." Favor. Now Wei Zhaoxing was thinking about favor. When he sent me into the palace, he never thought of any friendship at all. I pretended not to hear anything and just smiled. "Oh, you think the prince insults you? But you are willing to be insulted more and more. Doesn't this show your sincerity in apologizing to the prince? Who can you blame for this? If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for speaking without restraint and angering the prince. You have studied hard for 10 years to become a Hanlon scholar. If you lose your position because of this, all your efforts will be wasted." Wei Zhaoxing blushed at my few words. Perhaps he was so angry that he slammed the table and spoke without thinking. "Shun Tsue, don't think that just because you were favored by the prince for one night, you can step on my face. Don't you know what kind of person he is? He is moody and murderous. People in the government and the country are eager to eat his flesh alive. The prince gave you this gift because he finds it more fun to play with other people's wives than his own concubines. When he gets tired of you, do you think you can still stay in my Wei family? I have also heard some rumors about the regent. No one knows where Fu Jie came from. All we know is that he served in the battlefield for 7 years and made countless achievements. In the end, he led more than 1,000 elite cavalrymen, defeated 30,000 enemy troops, and saved 800 miles of territory in the north. After this battle, with military power in hand, Fu Jie openly supported the young emperor and controlled the government as the regent. Wei Zhaoxing wanted me to be afraid of Fu Jie's evil ambitions. But he forgot that he was also a disgusting poisonous snake. I pretended to be scared and looked terrified. Is that really the case? Then I am really scared. Go ahead. If I ever get abandoned, you must remember our old friendship. Seeing that I was shocked, Wei Zhaoxing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His greedy eyes swept over the dazzling array of jewels given by Fu Jie. He said, "Cui, as long as you serve the prince obediently, you will have your own benefits." 08. Wei Zhaoxing thought he had me under control and was in a good mood. When he had dinner with his family in the evening, he spoke loudly and said, "In ancient times, Han Xian suffered the humiliation of being kicked in the crotch. Now I, Wei Zhaoxing, have suffered the revenge of having my wife stolen from me." This is exactly in line with the saying, when God wants to give a man a great responsibility, he must first make his heart and mind suffer. Bearing the humiliation when facing adversity will allow me to be more successful in the future. Wei's parents looked at their only son with pity and praised him for his ambition and determination. Wei Zhaoxing's younger sister's eyes turned red because of this. She glared at me fiercely and said, "Brother, you have great ambitions. It's a pity that you are forced to marry an unfaithful woman. I feel sorry for you." Wei Yue is 3 years younger than me. When I was 8 years old, I came to the Wei family for refuge. She felt that I had taken away her love, so she was always weird to me. I felt sorry for her young age and innocence and never argued with her. However, this is no longer necessarily the case. I wiped the corner of my lips with a handkerchief and looked up at her. "Yue, have you forgotten that the person who sent me to the palace was your brother? It is my chastity that has saved your family's lives. I am magnanimous not to let you kneel on the ground and kowtow to me 3 times. Why are you still barking like a vicious dog?" Wei Yue felt guilty, but still said stubbornly, "Even if you saved us, but if you are not a virgin, you should marry my brother." I couldn't help but laugh and asked, "So, what should I do according to what you said?" Wei Yue avoided my gaze and said very quickly and softly, "You can end your life. A woman who has lost her chastity is not worthy to live in this world." I lowered my eyes so that no one could see the sadness in my heart. I always thought that even though Wei Yue and I had different words, we were still sisters for 10 years. Who can say you deserve to die to a sister of 10 years? What's more, it was her brother who personally sent me into this irretrievable situation. My eyelashes fluttered, and a smile slowly formed. Yue has grown up. She is well-mannered and eloquent. She is worthy of being Zhaoxing's younger sister. Everyone in the Wei family looked at each other, wondering what I was up to. I smiled and said, "Just do as you say. You told me just now that I should die when the prince gets tired of me. Now Yue also said that without chastity, I should end my life. You 2 brothers and sisters really have the same mind and both want me to die. So, how about this? Before the regent gets tired of me, I will commit suicide early and let Sister Yue serve the prince on my behalf." I looked at Wei Yue's pale face and said coldly, "Why, you won't trade your chastity for the glory of your whole family? Why should I, Shun Tsui, be willing to do something that you, Wei Yue, are unwilling to do?" 09. Wei Yue was at a loss, tears streaming down her face. She looked for help to her brother, who loved her the most. I couldn't help but sneer. "Yue, what are you looking at your brother doing? He boasts that he is well-read and concerned about the people of the world, but half of the people in the world are women. He can even give up his wife at birth. If he were an official, he would definitely be a dog official, who would be despised by everyone. How could he work for the welfare of the world?" Wei Zhaoxing finally couldn't stand it anymore and shouted, "That's enough. Stop talking." I held my head high and insisted, "You said enough is enough? Wei Zhaoxing, you spoke rudely and offended the prince." Wei Yue was outspoken and annoyed me. "You 2 siblings are really a pair of cowards, each more annoying than the other. So, I think we should just not get married. The wedding is tomorrow. If I don't get married, how can Wei Zhaoxing get his job back?" Wei Zhaoxing hugged his sister and urged her, "Hurry up and apologize to Tsui." Wei Yue was unconvinced and shook her head while sobbing. Wei Zhaoxing had no choice but to appeal to her emotions and reason with her. "Sister, your brother has suffered so much to get to this day. Please bear with me and apologize to her." In her dressing gown, the prince gave her a lot of new and interesting things. "I'll give them all to you, okay?" Wei Yue has always been coquettish and has a bad temper, so she still refused. At this moment, Wei's father, who had been silent at the table, suddenly stood up. He walked up to Wei Yingyue, leaning on a cane, his face as gloomy as water. Wei Yingyue acted innocent and said to her father coquettishly, "Father, I—" However, Wei's father slapped him. A clear and heavy sound. It was made with great force. Sure enough, Wei Yingyue staggered 2 steps before she could stand still. Another similar palm strike hit Wei Zhaoxing's face. Father Wei turned to look at me and said in a loud voice, "Miss Shen, my son contradicted you, and I have already taught him a lesson. Please marry my son tomorrow." They were really sincere in wanting to marry me. But how can just 2 slaps be enough? Tomorrow is my wedding, and I want to give him a surprise.
10.
Wei Zhaoxing and I were engaged since we were babies. He was handsome, diligent, and motivated. He studied hard by the window every day just to pass the imperial examination. After I fell in love, I also thought about what it would be like when I married Brother Wei. I thought of hundreds of possibilities. But I never expected it to be like this today. As requested by Fu Jie, Wei Zhaoxing held a grand banquet for guests, and almost every official, big and small, in the capital received a wedding invitation. Therefore, there were about 500 to 600 guests on the wedding day. Every guest had an expression other than joy on his or her face. Either disdain, contempt, or ridicule. I think everyone must have known that I was sent to the palace. Then it would not be in vain that I asked Coco to spread those seemingly true but false news. There were even some curious people in the crowd who shouted at Wei Zhaoxing, "The groom is wearing the wrong hat. It should be green. Why is it red?" There was a burst of laughter. Someone else responded, "Don't laugh, don't laugh. Brother Wei is just imitating the ancients and recommending himself." However, Brother Wei is illiterate, so the only thing he can offer is his first wife. The laughter became increasingly shrill. Although they were newlyweds, Wei Zhaoxing looked as if he had lost his parents. He was like a puppet, receiving the bride and performing the ceremony. After being sent to the bridal chamber, Wei Zhaoxing sat in the room until midnight. He seemed to have just woken up from a dream. He kept pacing in the room, muttering to himself. The prince said he would come to watch the ceremony. Why didn't he come? Could it be that he did this on purpose? He deliberately designed me to marry the woman he had played with before, so that the whole city would laugh at me? Then does his promise to let me resume my job still count? Wei Zhaoxing became more and more excited as he spoke, and finally went crazy, tearing his wedding gown into pieces. She stared at me intently and swore, "Shen Sui, you are the one who brought me to this point. I had a bright future, but you ruined it. I was bewitched and wanted you to serve the prince. If you were a good wife, you should have killed yourself right away to show your loyalty. Shen Sui, why don't you die?" I gritted my teeth and laughed in anger. "You have brought this upon yourself. What does it have to do with me? When the Shang dynasty fell, they blamed Daji. When the Wu dynasty fell, they blamed Shishir. You, Wei Zhaoxing, were ridiculed, and you blamed me, Shen Sui. It's obviously you men who are incompetent and shameless, so why are you putting the blame on women?" Wei Zhaoxing was so insulted and scolded by me that he wished his eyes would burst out. He suddenly swooped over and grabbed my throat fiercely. "Then I'll kill you. At least they can still praise me as a man of blood." Seeing this strange situation, Coco was eager to protect her master, so she hugged Wei Zhaoxing's fingers and started biting them. Wei Zhaoxing felt pain and slapped Coco. Staring at Coco's childish face, he suddenly revealed a strange smile. "Coco, come here. Your master married me, so you should serve me." My eyes widened suddenly, and I cursed, "Wei Zhaoxing, how dare you?" However, I finally felt a little panicked. Fu Jie clearly promised me that he would show up on my wedding night. But after all, he and I only met once. Fu Jie is notorious in the court. How can I trust him to keep his promise and protect me? I clenched my teeth so tightly that I could taste blood between my lips and teeth. But don't panic. At least Wei Zhaoxing can't see it. I held down Wei Zhaoxing's hand that was holding Coco's arm, raised the gold bracelet on my wrist, and sneered, "Wei Zhaoxing, Do you recognize this? 11. Wei Zhaoxing glanced at it and sneered. I recognize it. This is your stock in trade. The prince played with you on a whim. Why, you still can't forget it. I smiled contemptuously. You really don't know treasures. This is a hidden weapon specially made by the palace. It contains a poison needle that cannot be cured by medicine. If you want to attack Coco, then we will both die together. As soon as the words fell, Wei Zhaoxing has already let go. He took 3 steps back in fear, staring at the gold bracelet on my wrist, half believing and half doubting. I know I made the right bet. This bracelet is not a hidden weapon at all. It's just that Wei Zhaoxing values his life like gold. Wei Zhaoxing and I were in a stalemate, neither of us giving in. At this moment, a soft laugh suddenly came from the room. The folding fan lifted the curtain, revealing a thin and tall figure. The man's eyes were dark and deep. The mask looked cold and terrifying in the candlelight. Fu Jie's eyes swept across my tear-stained face, then briefly slid across my clothes. Suddenly, he turned his face away stiffly. I looked down and realized that during the argument, my clothes had been torn and several inches of skin were exposed. The plum blossom-shaped birthmark on the heart was clearly visible. My face felt hot, and I quickly turned away, covering myself with my clothes. On the other side, Fu Jie was playing with the folding fan in his hand, looking down at Wei Zhaoxing. Lord Wei, you don't remember a single word I said. Didn't I say that if I saw a beautiful woman crying when I visited the Wei mansion, I would be furious? Having said that, there is really thunderous wrath. Wei Zhaoxing immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed like crazy. Your Majesty, it is my rudeness that has offended your beloved. Fu Jie was obviously too lazy to talk to him. He just said coldly, Tonight I will stay here. This is the wedding room of Wei Zhaoxing and I. Fu Jie said so openly that he wanted to stay here. Wei Zhaoxing's face seemed to be both smiling and crying. Although I guessed that Fu Jie probably wouldn't do anything to me, my face was still burning, and my fingers were tangled in my wide sleeves. Coco didn't know the inside story, and was obviously anxious. She knelt in front of Fu Jie and said in a sad voice, My lord, I beg you to let my lady go. The young lady was originally a good and innocent daughter of a wealthy family. She was also very spoiled when she was little. Young lady's father and brother have devoted their hearts and souls to the country. I was afraid that she would say something wrong, so I quickly said, Coco, shut up. Fu Jie's eyebrows jumped. He looked at Coco with a serious gaze and his lips moving slightly, as if he was silently reciting her name. I don't know what he was thinking about. He looked a little dazed. When he came to his senses, he kicked Wei Zhaoxing on the shoulder. Even a maid knows that Chui's father and brother sacrificed their lives for the country. You claim to be full of poetry, but this is how you treat their orphan. Wei Zhaoxing's face turned pale. Fu Jie closed his eyes and said in a deep voice, Get lost. When he and I were alone in the room, he stretched out his arms and told me, Undress. 12. Although Fu Jie was powerful, he did not look like the kind of man who was addicted to women. I calmed myself down and deftly untied the belt of Fu Jie's black clothes. Even though I had severed all ties with Wei Zhaoxing long ago, seeing her undressing for another man in the bridal chamber still made me blush and my heart beat fast. However, the touch was cold. Looking more closely, it turned out to be a blood stain as big as a bowl. Fu Jie was stabbed in the abdomen, and the wound penetrated deep into the bone, but because he was wearing black clothes and it was late at night, it was not obvious. Fu Jie is second only to one man and above 10,000 others. Who dares to hurt him? I opened my mouth, wanting to call for help. Fu Jie raised his eyebrows and looked at me, then stretched out his hand to signal me to be quiet. It's no big deal if the scoundrels are causing trouble. The wound was so horrific, but he seemed not to notice it. He just stared at me with a dazed look in his eyes, muttering, I'm too late. Why didn't I come earlier? Chui, will you blame me? I made you suffer so much. The tone was full of regret. I didn't notice him. I just carefully took off his clothes and helped him lie down on the couch. Your Highness, I love to study spices, and there are many medicinal herbs in the room. If you don't mind, I can help stop the bleeding. Fu Jie was seriously injured, but he never mentioned it. Obviously, he had his own considerations. I didn't wait for a response. Because Fu Jie seemed to be extremely sleepy, he closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I lowered my eyes to look at him and was silent for a moment. Fu Jie's exposed body was covered with scars, both new and old, from whipping, knife wounds, and burns. This may be the mark left by his battles on the battlefield. Just from the scars, one can tell how many times he had been in life-threatening situations. When I was a child, I also saw so many scars on my father's body. Thinking of this, my eyes became a little sore. After working for half the night, the bleeding finally stopped, but the heat on Fu Jie's forehead continued to rise. I dipped a handkerchief in cold water and tried to cool his face. However, handkerchief was in trouble when he touched the black iron mask. Fu Jie covered half of his face with a mask, but no one knew what was underneath the mask. Some people speculated that he had been tattooed in his early years, so he wanted to hide his identity. Some people also guessed that he was so handsome that he imitated Lonling Prince and could only wear a scary mask. But no matter what, this secret should not be known to me. Just as I was hesitating, Fu Jie suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were deep and cold. It seems that anyone who angers him can be crushed like an ant. But after seeing who I was, Fu Jie suddenly relaxed, closed his eyes, and fell into a deep sleep again. It seemed like he trusted me.
But why?
I am the wife of his archenemy. Today was only the second time he saw me. How could a person who holds a high position and wields authority trust me so much? Not only was he seriously injured, he also kept his appointment with me, still sleeping soundly beside my pillow, defenseless. I stood up, turned off the light, sat on the footstool, and hugged my knees. I hardly slept that night. Firstly, he wanted to check on Fu Jie's condition at any time. Second, it's fear. 13. I recalled everything that had happened since I met Fu Jie. By the time I finished reminiscing, my back was stiff. When Coco mentioned me just now, she said, "My father and brothers have devoted all their efforts to the country and the people." When Fu Jie scolded Wei Zhaoxing, he said that his father and brother sacrificed their lives for the country. How did Fu Jie know that my father and brother sacrificed their lives for the country? After my father and brother died, I changed my surname from my father to my mother's. Very few people in the world know that my real name is Han Sui. But Fu Jie knew it. He must have checked me out. During the 3 days when he sent me back to Wei Mansion, he had already found out everything about my background. I tried to comfort myself. When we first met, I was Wei Zhaoxing's fiancé, so it was normal for Fu Jie to be wary and investigate my background. Moreover, a person who keeps his promise even when seriously injured is not completely bad, even if he is bad. I finally suppressed the panic in my heart. The next morning, although Fu Jie's fever had subsided, he still felt dizzy and unsteady on his feet. He smelled strongly of blood, so I mixed some scented powder and applied it on him to cover up the smell. Fu Jie curled the corners of his lips, with a hint of sarcasm in his expression. This is really a subtle fragrance. His brows were relaxed, and his tone was relaxed. It even made me doubt for a moment whether this was really his and my wedding night. But I quickly came to my senses. It's time for the prince to leave. Fu Jie looked in the mirror and straightened his sleeves. That's right. We can't stay here for a moment. Fu Jie carried me and opened the door. After seeing the people in the yard clearly, I was slightly startled and suddenly felt like a thorn in my side. The 4 members of the Wei family were all gathered together, guarding not far from the new house. The leader is, naturally, my husband. He knelt in front of Fu Jie, smiling sincerely. "Did your highness sleep well last night? I wonder what my position is." I don't know what kind of mood he was in as he waited at the door. Is it more joy or more resentment? During these years of staying at the Wei family, Wei's mother did not allow Wei Zhaoxing and I to meet often on the grounds of avoiding suspicion. But I always thought that he treated me with deep affection and loyalty. But in the end, I was wrong. Fu Jie was originally supporting me, but at this moment, he suddenly exerted force, and his fingertips turned white. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he pointed at Wei Zhaoxing and said, "Just write a letter of divorce. Got married yesterday and divorced today." It doesn't sound good, but Wei Zhaoxing was overjoyed. He immediately ground ink and spread out paper, wrote the letter of divorce in a few strokes, and handed it to me with a smile. Fu Jie glanced at him and nodded. "You take my instructions and go back to take charge." As for the Tsui, he held my hand and said something earth-shattering. "I will take it away." Mr. Wei blushed. But Wei Zhaoxing had already smiled and said, "Your Majesty, you are so kind to me." Fu Jie led me out of the gate of Wei Mansion step by step. As he took his last step, he said, "Don't worry. Let him climb high so that he can fall hard." 14. Fu Jie placed Coco and me in the most secluded courtyard in the palace. We are extremely particular about food, clothing, and other daily necessities. However, Fu Jie had not been seen for 3 days, probably because he was investigating why he was assassinated. However, a few respected servants in the palace came to greet me, fearing that they had failed to take care of me. Coco couldn't hide her feelings and said to me, "Miss, what is the prince's intention? If the prince is really attracted by your beauty, what should we do?" In fact, I have no idea what Fu Jie intends to do. If he wanted to keep me in the palace, why did he want me to marry Wei Zhaoxing? What's more, although we seemed very intimate in front of outsiders, there was actually nothing between him and me. But now that it has come, let's make the best of it. I asked Coco to take out the spices and make incense every day to pass the time. Coco was lively by nature and quickly became friends with the servants in the palace. She gave away the sachets, bags, and pills I made to everyone one by one. In return, I received countless snacks. I want her to stop being so flamboyant. If the prince's concubines knew about this, it would be inappropriate. Coco bit a piece of candy and said vaguely, "There are no concubines in the palace." I heard from the housekeeper that the young lady is the first lady to move in. My hands paused for a moment. After a long moment, I smiled. He is such a man of his word. If he falls in love with a woman, he will definitely stay with her forever. On the 7th day after I arrived at the palace, Fu Jie finally came to see me. He looks haggard but in good spirits. Before I could ask, Fu Jie had already spoken frankly. "Miss Tsui, I ordered you to marry Wei Zhaoxing because I didn't know your background and was testing you. Secondly, I really disliked him and wanted to humiliate him. I thought that if I found you to be a trustworthy person, I would choose a day to arrange your divorce. But I didn't expect Wei Zhaoxing to be so bold as to use violence against you." At this point, his eyes were filled with shock and fear. It was indeed reckless, and I regret it very much. For now, you can stay here peacefully. When the storm is over, I will take you out of the city and find a safe place for you to spend the rest of your life in peace. Don't worry, I will not show any mercy to the Wei family for treating you like this. Fu Jie always keeps his word and will definitely do what he promises. After hearing this, I felt relieved after being anxious for days. They looked at each other and didn't know what to say for a moment. I glanced at his waist, which was bound by a jade-white waistband, and asked in a low voice, "Is your injury healed?" "Excellent. That's good. Have you gotten used to living in my house these few days?" "All good. That's good. Although I don't like to write poetry, I am very good at it." Fu Jie was a high-ranking official, so naturally he could speak eloquently. But I have said the word good over and over again until I am tired of it, and I can't find any other word to replace it. Fu Jie was a little embarrassed when he noticed this. He raised his hand to taste the tea, and at this moment, I suddenly smelled a refreshing fragrance. Very familiar. 15. These days, I have been blending perfumes and giving them away as gifts, and almost every servant we deal with has one in his hand. But she definitely didn't have the courage to provoke the sullen-looking regent. So, why is there the fragrance I mixed in Fu Jie's sleeves? I suddenly lost focus for a moment. It was at this moment that Coco's shadow flashed from outside the yard and ran in happily. The little girl's voice came from far away. Miss, those 2 shops have been sold. We have something to deal with, so we can leave now. Fu Jie, who was sitting in the room, was stunned. He pursed his lips, his brows were cold, and asked me in a low voice, "Let's go?" The question, "Why are you leaving?" was clearly evident between his brows. But the outspoken Coco had already solved his confusion. She stepped into the room, still shouting, "How many people are exaggerating your marriage now? We should leave as soon as possible so that—" Coco swallowed her words, because she saw Fu Jie with a tense face. She hid behind me timidly. The ambiguous feeling just now has disappeared. I patted Coco's hand soothingly, then stood up and saluted Fu Jie. "I am a simple maidservant who has devoted all my life to me. I may have been a little rude in my words. Please do not mind me, Your Majesty." People believe everything they hear, but I know it clearly in my heart. Wei Zhaoxing has a dirty idea. Even if he doesn't give me to the prince, he might give me to someone else. He might even drug me and make me unconscious. If that happens, it will be even more difficult for us to escape. It was the prince who protected me. I will remember this favor in my heart. I consider my statement to be impeccable. But Fu Jie couldn't help but think that he was really smart. He tapped his chin with his folding fan, smiling. "You understand in your heart? How could you possibly understand? Even I don't understand. When Wei Zhaoxing offered his wife to me, I could have denounced him for his shamelessness, saved you, and protected your reputation. But I took advantage of your trick and used you to insult Wei Zhaoxing, so that our romantic affair would become a big news in the city. Although the incident was caused by Wei Zhaoxing, I took advantage of his own accord and damaged your reputation." "Chui, do you blame me?" My eyebrows twitched. "Any complaints?" "Maybe. But it is definitely not because of that empty and meaningless reputation. It was Fu Jie who investigated my background, but I knew nothing about him." I sighed in my heart and said, "I know that you were trying to use me when I first met the prince, and I was unwilling to accept that. It's normal for us to be wary of each other and not trust each other. But later, when the prince came to visit me at the Wei residence despite being seriously injured, I knew that you were a man who kept your promises and was worth making friends with." Having said that, my fleeting hesitation obviously did not escape Fu Jie's eyes. He laughed at himself and said succinctly, "I will arrange for someone to escort you out of the city in 5 days." Coco smiled happily and couldn't help asking, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for thinking of my young lady. We can leave tomorrow instead of waiting for 5 days." Fu Jie glanced at me. His brows were gloomy. He said, "To show you what happened to Wei Zhaoxing, we have to choose an auspicious day." At this moment, he seemed to have returned to the deep and unfathomable person he was when we first met.
16.
The day I left Beijing, dark clouds rolled in and spring rain suddenly fell. The carriage stopped deep in a deserted alley, the curtains slightly lifted, revealing 2 pairs of curious eyes. One is me, and the other is Coco. She is happier than me. Even though there was a grim-looking man sitting in the car, she couldn't help but clap her hands. What a joy! Isn't Madame Wei always the most dignified? Why is she lying on the ground now? Isn't it just that you are mortgaging your house to someone else and moving your family to a farm in the country? Why are you doing this? The second young lady has always been a servant, and now she is suffering. The old man is old, but he can still curse people. Hey, why didn't Master Wei come to see me? Fu Jie, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly spoke. He will be dismissed and investigated. He will be released in a few months. He will suffer some physical pain, but his life will be safe. However, his career in the government will be hopeless. Coco and I looked at each other and couldn't help but stick out our tongues. I thought Fu Jie wasn't listening. The carriage turned around and headed towards the city gate. The carriage suddenly became quiet. The rain was pouring down on the roof of the car, and my heart seemed to get heavier and heavier. Several times, when the carriage ran over rocks and bumped a little, my eyes would unconsciously glance over the man sitting diagonally in front of me. He lowered his eyes and didn't look at me. I knew that the car would stop at the first post station outside Beijing, and then Fu Jie would say goodbye to me. In fact, there is always a parting. I am already very grateful to Fu Jie for helping me punish the Wei family. But ever since he hid the sachet, I made myself. If anything happens, everything changes completely. I seem to have seen through Fu Jie's thoughts, but I couldn't possibly respond. Fu Jie is a man of deep scheming and strong tactics. Many people regard him as a tiger, leopard, jackal, or wolf. If I had a choice, I would never have anything to do with such a person. But why do I feel so choked up when I think of this? My guess was correct. The car stopped at the post house, where Fu Jie's servants were already waiting. One of them had an anxious look on his face, and when he saw Fu Jie, he leaned over to whisper. I don't know what they whispered to each other, but Fu Jie's face changed color, and he stared at a certain place in the sky in a daze. Maybe this wasn't the right time to say goodbye to him, but if I didn't, I would miss the opportunity. I clenched my fists, walked slowly forward, and spoke out what was in my heart in one breath. Reputation is something external to one's body. Your Highness doesn't mind it, and neither do I. If the prince does not give up, I am willing to make friends with him sincerely. In the eyes of the world, I can't escape the 4 words, water-loving poplar. In the eyes of the world, Fu Jie is a treacherous villain. But ever since he helped me out of trouble, I knew that even if he let down the world, he did not let me down. Every word I say is sincere. However, that person's face remained expressionless. When their eyes met, Fu Jie's Adam's apple moved slightly, and a hint of tenderness seemed to appear on his face. I almost thought he was going to ask me to stay. But he finally raised his hand and pointed at the road ahead. His tone was deep, but there was no room for maneuver. Miss Shin, you have a bright future ahead of you. You don't have to get involved with someone like me. Let's say goodbye now. Fu Jie actually rejected me directly. I bit my lower lip and comforted myself. This is how it should be. Since we just met by chance, we should part ways. However, an ebony token was suddenly handed into my palm. He explained a little awkwardly. This is my token. If you need anything, you can use this token to find me at the palace. After saying this, without waiting for my response, Fu Jie jumped on his horse, bowed to me, turned his horse around, and rode away. I subconsciously touched my wrist, but it was empty. The bracelet was too flashy and ostentatious, so Coco put it in her bag. The sound of rain gradually weakened. The wind blew across my cheeks, a chill came over me, and my thoughts gradually returned. The mountains are lush and green, and the water is gurgling. Fu Jie has his own way to go. I have mine too. I curled my lips, hugged Coco, and asked her, Little girl, we escaped, are you happy? Coco grinned at me. I'm happy. As long as I'm with you, everything is happy. 17. My biological mother comes from a family of incense makers and has great skills. I inherited her talent for playing with powder. When I was 15, I opened a shop with a capital of 500 silver coins. Unexpectedly, the business became better and better. In just 3 years, 2 shops were opened and the profits were soaring. This time I settled in the south, and I also went back to my old business. I was busy making incense for 5 or 6 months, and it was already late autumn when I heard news from Fu Jie again. This is not good news. Fu Jie was attacked while patrolling the river, and his whereabouts were unknown. It is unknown whether he is alive or dead. At the same time, several of his confidants changed their minds and joined the 9th uncle Liu Yan, who disagreed with Fu Jie's political views. In a short time, Liu Yan's power rose rapidly. I have heard of this person's name before. More than 10 years ago, when the late emperor was still alive, he intended to win over my father and brother and make him the crown prince. After being rejected by the Han family, he became angry and set many traps for my father and brother. I still remember my father's comment that Liu Yan had a cruel temper and was definitely not a wise leader. The place where Fu Jie last disappeared was only 100 miles away from me. Do you want to go find him? Can I find it? And in what capacity should I go looking for him? However, Fu Jie is now deserted by his friends and relatives. If one more person looks for him, perhaps he will have a better hope of survival. Moreover, having been in the south for many days, I had already discovered that the public's evaluation of Fu Jie was quite different from what I heard from Wei Zhaoxing. Fu Jie dealt with corrupt officials with cruel methods that frightened people. But he imposed light taxes and levies on the people and was extremely compassionate. How the officials scold him, how the people praise him. I thought about it for a long time and didn't know which one to believe. But I finally figured it out. Those who are praised by the people are good people. If he is a good person, he should be saved. I closed the shop temporarily and headed north along the river. Coco stole a glance at me, puzzled. Why did you go to see the prince? It's a long journey. It must be tiring. I couldn't explain to her what the court's party struggles were or what the people wanted. I just said, he was kind to me. Coco was still puzzled. You have managed to save several thousand taels of silver, and I don't know how much you will spend on this trip. That's true. I counted the banknotes in my hand and said angrily, when I wanted to save Wei Zhaoxing in the past, I was prepared to exchange for 6,000 taels of silver. This time, let's limit it to this. When we spend it all, we'll go home. Having said that, I overestimated the difficulty of finding people. Hiring carriages, hiring people, getting information, lodging, food and drink, everything costs money. In just 2 or 3 months, the 6,000 taels were all spent. Coco urged me to go home. But I took out the money that I had hidden in the bottom of the box. After a month, the money was all gone, and I found the gold bracelet again. After thinking for a while, she took off her hairpin and jewelry. They all became pawnshops. Try again. Coco covered her mouth in astonishment. Miss, why are you so desperate? Could it be that you are waiting for the prince?
She didn't dare to say it.
She still feels scared whenever she mentions Fu Jie. My eyes immediately turned red. I didn't say yes, nor did I say no. I just said, no matter what, I want to see him alive or dead. 18. I have searched the short river channel of several hundred miles where Fu Jie disappeared twice, but to no avail. This winter, the wind was freezing cold, and it snowed for several days in a row. The snow was waist deep, and I could hardly move. To make matters worse, the 9th prince's evil ambitions have been fully exposed. He gathered forces from all sides and headed straight for the capital, intending to force the young emperor to abdicate and give way to a wise man. If Fu Jie can't be found, I'm afraid the whole world will change. I got so angry that 2 blisters appeared on the sides of my mouth. My feet were also worn out. The whole person was in a state of panic. Maybe I'll give up. But not today. Just when I didn't give up and started searching for the 3rd time along the river. At the dock, I saw a man. He was holding a green bamboo umbrella, wearing a white shirt, and looked thin. Just by taking a look at it, my heart, which had been hanging in the air for many days, finally settled down. I watched the man walk towards me. I bit my lip and uttered a few words. Wang Fuyu. There is no need to call for anything, because Fu Jie looked at me and smiled softly. Why are you looking for me? Holding back the tears welling up in my chest, I choked up and said, I wasn't looking for you. I was just sightseeing and happened to pass by here. Fu Jie raised his eyebrows mysteriously. The next moment, he held my hand, and without saying anything, he put something heavy on my wrist. It's the gold bracelet I pawned. Maybe it was because it was warmed by his palm, so my hands were not cold at all. Fu Jie sighed. If you hadn't taken it and informed me, I wouldn't have known you were looking for me. And I've wasted all my time. So, why are you looking for me? I am such a treacherous and cunning person. Why would you look for me? When he talked about extremely cunning, he actually laughed at himself a bit. But I got anxious. Yes, you killed your colleagues without mercy, but they were all corrupt officials. You are compassionate to the people and you spent all the national treasury to repair canals, build hospitals, and provide relief to disaster victims. The 9th prince is a kind and studious man, gentle and refined, but under his rule, he imposes heavy taxes, causing widespread resentment among the people. Fu Jie, Do you know that the ninth prince has already gathered his own army and is about to declare himself king? If you don't return to the capital, I'm afraid there will be chaos." Fu Jie's smile gradually faded. He said hoarsely, "I know everything. When I sent you away from Beijing, this person's ambitions were just beginning to show. I was afraid that you would be in danger if you stayed with me, so I sent you away. But I didn't expect that you would come looking for me again." The topic turned to why I was looking for him. It seemed as if even someone as smart as Fu Jie couldn't guess it. I was filled with shame and anger, so I took a step back and complained in a low voice. Okay, it was my recklessness, my self-conceitedness. I didn't guess that you, Your Majesty, had great magical powers, hiding in the dark under the guise of being missing. I'm going home now." Fu Jie nodded in understanding, but then asked meaningfully, "Don't you want me to pay for the money you spent?" When I mentioned money, my heart started beating faster and my voice became louder. Yes. In the snow, the man's eyes were full of smiles. It seemed as if he was very happy to see that I loved money. After laughing enough, Fu Jie suddenly grabbed my hand and interlocked our fingers. He said, "Come on, Coco, I'll take you home." 19. Co. My eyes widened suddenly. Why would Fu Jie call Coco in front of me? Could it be that he didn't even remember my name? Then my search for him over the past 3 or 4 months has been a joke. Seeing my body stiff, Fu Jie smiled helplessly. "You really forgot about me." He reached out and untied his mask. There are rumors that Fu Jie had a face like a devil and had to cover up his ferocious appearance. However, when the mask was taken off, eyes as bright as cold stars were still revealed. Except there's a scar the size of a teacup on his forehead. It seems like a burn from old times. Fu Jie took my hand and pressed it against his face. There was already a hint of anxiety and uneasiness in his tone. "It's been 10 years since we last met. Will my current appearance scare you?" I was stunned, as if some distant memory was sweeping over me through the clouds and mist. My lower lip trembled, as if I couldn't believe it. I once saved a young boy from a fire. I told him his name was Coco. 11 years ago, before the Han family collapsed, the family had already sensed that a storm was coming. My father and brother entrusted me to a wet nurse and sent Coco and I on a carriage, asking us to head north to the capital to find the Wei family to which I had been betrothed. When we left, my father held my face in his hands and said sternly, "Cui Yi, I know that you have always been proud of being a daughter of the Han family, but you must never mention this surname again." The wet nurse took the 2 young girls with her, hiding from place to place. A distance that could have been covered in half a month took them 3 months to cover. In the cold last month of winter, the wet nurse fell ill and passed away. Coco and I begged everyone in the inn, and in the end only a young man in white clothes stepped forward and buried her for us. That evening, I saw the young man carrying a bucket of lamp oil into the room. It was late at night, and the fire was blazing brightly. I rushed into the room regardless of everything, grabbed the boy's hand, and tried to run out. But he grabbed me by the collar and wanted to throw me out of the window. He said, "I left money with the innkeeper, enough to make up for the loss." My family was murdered by a villain. 13 people in the family died. How could I survive alone? I corrected him breathlessly. "Death is the simplest thing, but it can only make loved ones sad and enemies happy. They say it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. If you don't try, how do you know you can't seek revenge? I think the feeling of revenge must be very satisfying." The man looked serious, as if he had just been enlightened. When we were escaping from the room, the roof beam collapsed, and he was burned on half of his face while trying to protect me. The next day, the young man wrapped in white cloth bowed to me solemnly. He said, "May I ask your name? I will repay you one day." I remembered my father's instructions and casually called out Coco's name. A few days later, the boy left. I heard that he was going to sign up for the army. I never imagined that I had met Fu Jie 11 years ago. He understood my saying death is easy, but revenge is more satisfying, and taught it to me 11 years later. When Wei Zhao was about to present me, Fu Jie did not recognize me. It was not until the night Wei Zhaoxing and I got married that Fu Jie saw the birthmark on my chest. In the fire that year, my clothes were burned and the birthmark was exposed. It was the last clue for him to recognize me. That's why Fu Jie said that he was late. If he had found me earlier, maybe I wouldn't have to suffer so much. My heart couldn't help but beat up and down. Fu Jie, who is your enemy? Fu Jie opened his mouth slowly, his eyes already filled with overwhelming hatred. Same as you. His name is Liu Yan, or you can call him the ninth uncle.
20.
Liu Yan was the younger brother of the late emperor and was greatly favored by the emperor. Many years ago, he had already harbored rebellious intentions. 5 years ago, the 7-year-old prince succeeded to the throne. Liu Yan wanted to raise an army, but he did not expect Fu Jie to return to the court with an army of 100,000 and take over the government. On the surface, Liu Yan was jealous of Fu Jie, so he retired to his fiefdom and indulged himself in the mountains and rivers. However, he was secretly raising soldiers and buying horses, ready to make a move. A year ago, he sent someone to assassinate Fu Jie but failed. Later, he took advantage of Fu Jie's inspection of water conservancy to assassinate him again. This time, Fu Jie used a trick to escape by faking his own death and hiding outside the capital. He also ordered his confidants to pretend to surrender to Liu Yan so that they could cooperate with him from inside and outside. Now, Liu Yan thought that the capital was empty and could be attacked, so he gathered 100,000 soldiers and advanced from all sides, heading straight for the capital. But the day the city was broken was also the day he died. On the 15th day of the first month of the 5th year of the Jingyuan reign, Liu Yan took advantage of the festive occasion to launch a surprise attack on the capital and attacked all 9 gates. Unexpectedly, the generals who had previously defected to him suddenly turned against him, joined forces with Fu Jie, and strangled Liu Yan to death. The two sides engaged in a melee, with arrows flying like rain. 2 days later, Liu Yan surrendered, and the 8-month civil unrest was quelled. However, Fu Jie could not rest. Because Liu Yan's son Liu Xing escaped in a hurry, he needed to be killed as soon as possible. In addition, thousands of refugees caused by the war urgently need resettlement. I couldn't bear to see Fu Jie busy all the time, so I took the initiative to ask for help and built a soup kitchen and a clinic to provide relief. I was distributing porridge that day when suddenly an old woman in ragged clothes knelt down in front of me and cried bitterly. She shouted, "Please, Miss Shen, save my daughter." I asked curiously, "Who is your daughter?" The old woman suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She is your sister, Yue." I couldn't help but squint my eyes. Wei Yue? I haven't heard this name for a long time. What a coincidence. I was just looking for them when they showed up at my doorstep. My eyes darkened. How is she? The old woman wiped her tears, her voice becoming sad. Last year, after Xinger lost his job, he was confused for a moment and actually went to Liu Yan. In order to seek promotion, he gave Yue to one of Liu Yan's followers. Later, Liu Xing's army was defeated and he fled, with Xinger and Yue following him. My husband and I begged Xinger to take us with him, but he abandoned us because we were physically challenged. My husband got so angry that he passed away within 2 days. I am just a woman and I have no other options, so I can only ask the young lady to be kind. As soon as the words fell, Coco rushed out. Pointing at Wei's mother's face, she was so angry that she jumped up and down. When Wei Zhaoxing humiliated my daughter, why did you just sit there and do nothing? Now it's your daughter's turn to be humiliated, and you come and cry. You're asking my lady to be kind? Think about it yourself. Are you worthy enough? But I pressed Coco's hand. He asked calmly, 11 years ago, I went to the Wei family with a letter from my father. What did the letter say? Tell me the truth, and I will help you finding Yue's whereabouts. 21. Mother Wei spoke hesitantly, but finally told the truth. It turns out that the Han family's downfall was really related to Liu Yan. But my father knew that the enemy was a royal noble and he was powerless to take revenge, So he instructed the Wei family in a letter to keep everything secret so that I could grow up in peace. The Wei family was jealous of Liu Yan's powerful background, so they let the matter go. The adults who had assessed the situation had resigned themselves to their fate and given up on revenge. Only the ignorant 8-year-old girl dared to tell the passionate 18-year-old boy. It is never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. No one expected that Fu Jie would really fight his way out of the mountain of corpses and sea of blood, and step by step, stand at the highest point. Did he feel any satisfaction when he killed his enemy? I gradually came back to my senses from Coco's urgent call. I wiped away the tears from my eyes and whispered, "Write a letter to the prince and ask him to keep an eye out for Yue's whereabouts." When I was scolding Wei Zhaoxing, I said that half of the people in the world are women. He regarded women's lives as worthless, which is why he did such a shameful thing as sacrificing his wife. But I can't do it. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, I will protect the girl who is suffering. Even when she was innocent, she said things that made me angry. However, Lu Sheng's remaining troops were hiding here and there, making it difficult to wipe them out for the time being. It was not until half a month later that I got news about Wei Yingyue. Fu Jie captured Lu Sheng alive and also captured all his followers, including Wei Zhaoxing, and also found Wei Yingyue among the female relatives. However, when he mentioned her, Fu Jie's eyes darkened. During this journey, she was depressed and uneasy, tried to commit suicide many times, and bit several servants. So I don't want you to see her. Since I reunited with Fu Jie, we have been almost always together. Although we have not said it explicitly, we already know each other's feelings. My heart sank. I'll go check on her. Fu Jie's description of Wei Yingyue being depressed and uneasy was already an euphemism. In fact, Wei Yingyue looks crazy and scary. The servants were afraid of her and dared not get close to her. I just sighed and asked Coco to bring me some sachets that can calm the mind. When Wei Yingyue was drowsy and seemed half asleep, I asked Coco to fetch some hot water and bathed her myself. Her body was covered with bruises, whip marks, and bites. It was obvious that she had been abused in the past 2 or 3 months. Coco and I looked at each other and saw sadness in each other's eyes. If the person I met was not Fu Jie, I'm afraid that what happened to Wei Yingyue today will be my fate. I applied medicine to Wei Yingyue's wound, and for the first time I hated myself for not persuading Fu Jie to kill Wei Zhaoxing earlier. However, it should be soon. He has committed many evil deeds and will certainly die by himself. If he joins the rebels, he will naturally be killed without mercy. Under my care, Wei Yingyue on the bed slowly opened her eyes. She called me sister. Just this one sound made my eyes red. 22. During the first few days after I arrived at the Wei family, Wei Yingyue still liked me and kept calling me sister all day long. Later, when she found out that I was her brother's fiancé, she felt jealous. I once heard her complain to her parents, "Why can Sister Tsui stay with you for the rest of her life, but I have to marry someone else?" She loves her parents and her elder brother. But it was her elder brother who pushed her into an irretrievable situation. I held back my tears and smiled at her. "Don't be afraid, it's all over. I will ask the prince to express his gratitude to the emperor and make sure you are properly settled." Resettlement? That's not necessary. Wei Yingyue's face turned pale, and she burst into tears. "Sister, let me die." As soon as I said this, I clenched my hands at my sides. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Wei Yingyue burst into tears. "I have lost my chastity. How can I survive in this world?" I seem to have heard this before. Isn't this the way the Wei family has always educated their children? I sneered a few times and my eyes became firm. "Yingyue, it's your greedy brother who is wrong from the beginning to the end, not you. What is chastity? What is honor? Since men created chastity to bind women, why do they seek success by stepping on women's bodies? I don't believe what others say. I only believe that I have a clear conscience. Yingyue, you must live. Put fame and integrity under your feet, and live happily and freely. The so-called truth in the world is always high-sounding. But if I don't believe it, then it's just a dogskin plaster." Wei Yingyue looked at me for a long time, and her eyes gradually turned red. I knew that the doctrine she had been indoctrinated with for 16 years would not change so quickly. But if you keep it step by step, things will change. After comforting Wei Yingyue, I walked out of the room. But I didn't expect that a man would suddenly kneel down in front of me with his forehead touching the ground. When he raised his head, his eyes were affectionate, as if filled with deep love. Wei Zhaoxing said softly, "Cui yi." Back then, I knew I was crude and unworthy of you, so I offered you to the Regent King. The king is wise and brave, and you and I are made for each other. I know you resent me in your heart, but if I hadn't acted as a bridge for you, how could you have met and known each other? I know I am guilty. Please, for the sake of our 10 years of friendship, ask the Regent for mercy on my behalf. He described his wife's sacrifice for glory as a beautiful act. Wei Zhaoxing's ability to confuse right and wrong is truly admirable. I laughed in anger. Really? Then, did you give Yingyue to Liu Yan's follower with the same intention? But I heard that the man is over 50 years old and can be Yingyue's father. After that man died, Yingyue fell into the hands of others, who tortured her in every way, leaving not even a piece of healthy skin on her body. The more I talked, the more hatred I felt. However, Wei Zhaoxing looked shocked, as if he had just heard the news for the first time. How could this be? Alas, it was my negligence as a brother. I could tell how shameless he was just by listening to his tone. The image of Wei Yingyue with bruises all over her body came to my mind. I gritted my teeth and said, "Very good. Very good. You want me to plead for you? Don't worry. I will ask the prince to leave you an intact body." Having said this, I became so angry that I felt dizzy and my body was shaking slightly. A pair of hands gently supported my shoulders, lending me some strength. The man was wearing a golden crown and a dragon robe, and he was tall and slender. Fu Jie held my hand and stared at Wei Zhaoxing, his eyes filled with a chill. Why bother begging for mercy? If killing someone can make her feel better, I will be happy to disembowel her or cut her into pieces. The aura around him was intimidating. Unexpectedly, Wei Zhaoxing laughed and said, "Your Majesty can't kill me." A few days ago, I informed the capital and revealed the whereabouts of the bandits, which helped the prince catch them all in one fell swoop. Perhaps the decree of the award will come down in a few days. If the prince wants to kill me, he must disobey his order. 23. Even though I hated Wei Zhaoxing, I still admired his ability to judge the situation and get the best of both worlds. He boarded Liu Yan's pirate ship while secretly communicating with the court. The advantage of betting on both sides is that the imperial decree to reward him will soon come, and once the hat of making up for one's crime with merit is put on him, unless Fu Jie is bent the law for personal gain, he really cannot be touched. After hearing the decree, Fu Jie's eyes dimmed slightly, and he immediately comforted me. "Don't worry. I can't kill Wei Zhaoxing today, but one day I will find his fault." Even if Fu Jie wanted to eradicate the traitors and evildoers, this world is not immune to the presence of evil spirits and monsters. I was feeling depressed, but I didn't expect that Wei Yingyue would actually clap her hands and laugh after hearing what I said. Really? My brother is so capable? I really underestimated him. Sister Tsui, please let me go see my brother. From today onwards, Wei Yingyue, will still have to rely on my brother to survive. I looked at her beautiful eyes and sighed deeply in my heart. When you were seriously injured, Wei Zhaoxing ignored you. How could you entrust your future to him? Since persuasion doesn't work, there's no need to persuade him anymore. I asked Coco to arrange a meeting between the brother and sister. No one knew what Wei Yingyue was planning, but before meeting Wei Zhaoxing, she put on the most elegant dress and asked Coco to put on makeup for her. From a distance of 10 feet, I saw Wei Yingyue smiling at Wei Zhaoxing. After a few coquettish words, she threw herself into her brother's arms like a young swallow flying into the forest. It seemed as if seeing her brother after surviving a near-death experience was the happiest thing in her life. "Little girl, you're still being silly." I couldn't bear to watch any longer, so I took Coco's hand and wanted to turn around and leave. Unexpectedly, Wei Yingyue suddenly broke away from her brother's arms. The next moment, Wei Zhaoxing suddenly bent his body and fell to the ground. The blue robe he was wearing was stained with blood, and supported his sister. But he raised his hand without hesitation and stabbed the dagger in his hand again. My heart skipped a beat, and I ran over, holding up the hem of my skirt. All I could hear was Wei Zhaoxing panting and cursing, "Yingyue, I am your brother. The brother who loves you the most. How could you?" But Wei Yingyue pushed the dagger another 3 points deeper. Amid Wei Zhaoxing's screams, she smiled and said, "Yes, you are the brother who loves me the most. I remember every word you said. You told me that a woman who has lost her chastity is not worthy of living in this world. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then I thought, wasn't it my brother who pushed me into the fire? Then isn't it reasonable for me to die with my brother?" At dusk, the crimson glow of the sunset reflected on her pale face. Her chest rose and fell violently, and the butterfly bones on her back opened and closed with her heavy breathing, like a butterfly about to flap its wings and fly. I held Wei Yingyue in my arms. Before he could even open his mouth, tears were already streaming down his cheeks. "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. From now on, I will protect you." But Wei Yingyue smiled shyly. "I am afraid that I will disappoint my sister. I have swallowed the poison that will kill me."
I felt a pain in my chest.
Finally, I know what the medicine powder was that Coco found Wei Yingyue hiding under her pillow. We discussed for half a day and finally decided not to make any trouble. I mixed some incense powder with similar color and smell and replaced the powder. Wei Yingyue will not die. It's enough to do such a stupid thing as seeking death once. She would take a long nap. When she wakes up, she will find herself in a small town with beautiful mountains and rivers. Her life will start over. No one would tell her to be virtuous anymore. There was only a blank painting scroll for her to paint freely.
24.
In October of the 5th year of Xingyuan, I married Fu Jie. The world is chewing over with gusto the story of how I married the king regent for the second time. There are even rumors that I am a demon who has been practicing for thousands of years. After hearing such a bizarre story, Fu Jie and I laughed half the night between our pillows. Finally, he stroked my hair and said with a smile, "It's not a demon at all. All we have is sincerity, which can be seen by the sun and the moon." In the 6th year of Xingyuan, the Han family was rehabilitated, and my deceased parents and brother were posthumously honored. In the 7th year of Xingyuan, I founded a girls' school and thoroughly criticized the principle of obey your father before marriage, obey your husband after marriage, and obey your son after your husband's death. Many censors wrote to me, accusing me of spreading rumors and misleading the people. Fu Jie looked innocent. She has a point. It has always been the case that I follow her and she never follows me. Then everyone in the city knew that the regent loved his wife as much as his life and feared her as much as a tiger. In the 8th year of Xingyuan, Coco also got married. Fu Jie brought 88 loads of dowry as a dowry, and he finally got the words bought from the maid. In fact, the prince is also very good. In the 9th year of the Xingyuan reign, a certain city in the southwest offered several rolls of exquisite silk, which I loved so much that I could not let them go. The imperial court allocated funds, and the weaving workshop named Yingyuefang became more and more prosperous. In the 10th year of Xingyuan, the emperor got married and Fu Jie resigned from his post and returned to seclusion. The 17-year-old emperor was as tall as him, but he still held on to his sleeve and refused to let go. Fu Jie was so angry that he poked her on the forehead and said, "Always hiding behind me. When will you grow up? Besides, I have worked so hard to build this peaceful and prosperous world for you. Why don't you let me take a break?" The emperor scoffed. "It's just that now that you have your own flesh and blood, you don't want to care about a child like me who is picked up halfway." After his thoughts were exposed, Fu Jie's usually cold face finally showed a bit of embarrassment. But he quickly took my hand again and said seriously, "We must teach this child well. It would be bad if he was as cunning as me." In the 13th year of the Xingyuan reign, a perfume shop was opened outside the capital. Everyone said that although the boss's wife was beautiful, she had a bad temper. Every day, neighbors could hear her ordering her husband to do this and that. Sometimes he had to fetch water, sometimes he had to chop wood, and he had to help her carry herbs and climb up and down. Some people feel sorry for her husband. As her husband, you are her heaven. How can she order you around? The husband looked very proud. What do you know, you wild man? What's the matter with heaven or earth? This is because my wife loves me for my strength. End of full text.